will turn it over to Amanda, who is our moderator for the next panel.
Thank you. Very excited for the next panel. The great topics just keep continuing. So the second panel is advancing the role of conservation districts in assisting communities prepare for and recover from disaster-related events. We have a group of great speakers, and we're going to start. It was already teed off very well about FireWise. So we will go to Megan Fitzgerald McGowan from the National Fire Protection Association.
Hey, Megan.
Good morning. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Megan, and I work for the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA. For those of you who maybe haven't heard of us, we are a global self-funded nonprofit organization established in 1896. We're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. And we're devoted to eliminating the death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, and related hazards. I work in our very small wildfire division that's mostly based out of Denver, Colorado, with our supervisor back at headquarters in Quincy, Massachusetts. Our wildfire division, you'll see that our mission kind of aligns with the larger mission, but is to provide resources to residents, key influencers, to help ensure that everyone living at risk from wildfire has the information, knowledge, and tools to reduce that. So when we look at the National Cohesive Strategy and all of those efforts, a lot of the work that we do is in the fire adapted community space. And, you know, like I said, we have resources to help folks like you, conservation districts, our state partners, other local practitioners for engaging. We offer a well-known community engagement program that will be my primary focus today, but then a couple of other things. We also have training and certification for those practitioners. So this isn't on like the suppression fire response side, but on that practitioner side with our wildfire mitigation specialist and our home ignition zone training. And then we also have educational outreach materials available to you and direct for those communities to access. We have fact sheets and tip sheets online that can be downloaded and shared. We also have some print materials that can be ordered from our catalog for free. And everything that we do at NFPA is based in science. So the messages we put out there, the resources we put out there in our program is all based on research that really started back in the 1980s with Dr. Jack Cohen. He's a retired researcher with the US Forest Service. He was looking at homes and how they ignite from wildfires, and at that time was able to go and build structures and set off sections of forest to kind of look at that spacing and materials to see what made a difference and what helped and what didn't. Through his research, he developed the concept of the home ignition zone. So the home ignition zone is simply that the home materials and its immediate surroundings dictate its ignitability, and it's broken down into the condition of the home itself. And then the 0 to 5 foot zone, our friends at IBHS call this the non-combustible area, but really that area is so critical to that home survival, and it should be free of any debris that's going to ignite and burn. And then as you work your way out, there's different recommendations for the different zone areas. But the whole idea is that homeowners, residents, renters can take action and should take action to play, you know, their own role in wildfire preparedness and safety. So I heard that mentioned in the previous panel. Helping those residents know that, one, you live in a wildfire prone area, two, there's a chance that your home could be threatened by a wildfire, but three, there's things you can do to help it out. And some of them are really low cost, super effective. There are some bigger high price items things, but a lot of the other work can make it so you can push those high cost things back further. When we look at NFPA and our main program that we're known for, which is FireWise USA, conversations around this program started back again in the 1980s, but it didn't really come to be until 2002. But the vision was that wildland fires can occur in areas of residential development without occurrence of disastrous loss, and that a house and its surrounding can community can be compatible with the area's ecosystem. And that fits right into that idea of a fire adapted community, a community that is built to withstand fire, has mechanisms in place for response, evacuation, all those things, codes and standards, well-trained and supported fire response organizations. All of those go into that whole idea of that fire adapted community. And our firewise sites are usually well ingrained with those and are helping all those other parts on the spectrum as well. So when we look at specifically Firewise USA, again, it was created in 2002 by NFPA with support from the USDA Forest Service and state forestry organizations. At the time, it started with 12 sites, and we are now up to over 1,800 across the nation with, yes, a large representation in the West, but we see it all across, and I'll show a map here soon of the South and the Southeast, the Northeast. So, you know, any state organization that wants to participate and facilitate Firewise can. We have 43 state partners right now because there's some states where it's just not maybe the biggest threat or the risk. But the whole idea is we're helping to address that risk on private property where sometimes federal and state agencies can't really go. It's hard for them to go and tell people what to do on their property. So rather we created a voluntary program. One key takeaway here is those state forestry organizations. So we work with whether it's a DNR or state forest service, whoever has the state forester, they are our main partners and they facilitate the program within their state through a series of networks of local practitioners. And those practitioners could be from fire departments, could be from conservation districts. We see a lot of involvement with Firewise USA in Washington state. I haven't heard a lot from other states, but they're a really good model for looking at how a conservation district can be involved. We also work with other nonprofits in California, it's fire safe councils. But again, you are those folks that are there on the ground. You might already be engaged with communities working on other projects. And so you can be that trusted resource to help guide them through the process. But it is a program for residents. It's for communities, whether it's an HOA or two private roads where neighbors just want to work together, but they are involved in the process through the whole thing. They should really own it. The practitioners there to support them, give subject matter expertise and guide them, but not there to do the work for them. You know, you might be able to assist with helping them organize a meeting because that's in your skill set where it might not be in their skill set, things like that. So again, here's a map to see where Firewise USA is active. We also have sites in Hawaii and Alaska. I just couldn't grab them to fit on this map. And, you know, each year we see growth, especially after there have been some really big fires. So California is our quickly growing state right now. They have over 300 sites, more than 100 in the pipeline, but we've also seen a lot of growth in Washington, Oregon. But again, in the Southeast, we have those well-established states or sites in Minnesota that have been in for a long time, and the local practitioners fight to keep them there because they see the value in engaging them and helping them do the work on their own property. So again, Firewise USA, it's based in science, that concept of the home ignition zone, where we're basically saying, well, my home, if I do work around it, can help protect me, but hey, your home and mine are within 100 feet of each other. So if we both do the work, we help protect each other, and it kind of spreads out from there. The program itself provides a framework for action. So there is a set of criteria that a community has to meet in order to join. They have to create things like a community risk assessment, and that could be based on a CWPP. We also offer a template with an online tutorial that walks you through it and the resident through it. That's really focused on what we're looking at within Firewise, that condition of the homes and the surrounding landscape immediately within the community. It can help individuals learn about wildfires. So, you know, you get your core team of residents who want to lead and kind of be in charge of their group, and they're going to start setting up those meetings with their neighbors, sharing information, bringing in speakers. As they start to do the work, they can get that peace of mind knowing they've put in that effort to help out their home, to help out the firefighters, to help keep everyone safe in the event of a wildfire. It's a really good way to do community building. So we see one requirement each year is to have, you know, an educational outreach event, and then also to do risk reduction investment activities. And communities love hosting their annual work day, getting folks together, whether they work in a common area or they all do work on their properties, like clearing out the pine needles, picking up branches. Maybe they're going to have a chipper come through, and then they do that barbecue. And it's that way to do the work, get people together, share information. And we do know, kind of anecdotally with a little bit of qualitative research, that face-to-face interaction is most effective for getting this work done. Online campaigns can only go so far, but speaking with your neighbors, helping them out, doing that shared work really, really seems to be the most effective way to get things going. It can help build citizen pride. So these sites are recognized for their efforts. When they join the program, we do send out recognition materials like a sign and signs and plaques, but they get featured in articles, whether it's on our blog and in our journal or in their local newspaper. It's a way to really put them kind of up on the stage, and these people are proud of what they do, and they love to share their stories, and they love to connect with others who are interested and want to take action, but maybe don't know how to get started. And then being a part of the FireWise program can also provide that chance maybe for access to more resources. So we here at NFPA do not provide grants to FireWise sites. We do have a small funding award through our annual Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. That's a separate thing that we put out there. But we have seen in some states where the grants that they offer, if you are a FireWise site, maybe your application looks a little better because it shows that you are organized, that you are connecting with others, you have a network, and that you're ready to do the work. Each state, again, is different in how they engage with the program. They might have some additional criteria. We'll go through the criteria in just a second. And they might differ in how they offer their grants and their resources to their citizens, but it's one thing to keep in mind. So, as that practitioner on the ground, as a conservation district, I would really encourage you to, if you're interested, visit our website at firewise.org to learn about the program, but also reach out within your state networks, those folks who are already engaged in wildfire preparedness, to see what they're doing, what their efforts are, and really kind of work in line with that. There's no need to go out on your own and start from scratch. There's all kinds of resources to help you. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is just get online, look into it a little more, and then start really building your network and reaching out. Since I have a couple minutes real quick, the steps to achieving FireWise USA recognition, and I keep saying recognition because that's an important point. Some people say certification. NFPA offers professional certifications, so we really like to make that differentiation. We are recognizing sites for their efforts, but no one is going in and inspecting them and saying, yes, you're certified, you've done all the things you can do, you are not going to burn down. That's not what we're doing. Rather, we're recognizing folks for their efforts and trying to encourage them to keep going each year, because we know that wildfire preparation isn't a one and done thing. So real quick, the steps to participating in the program: you have to get organized with that risk assessment, form a board or committee with residents and other stakeholders, determine your size and boundary. So a FireWise site has to have at least 8 homes working together with a max of 2,500 dwelling units. And we used to allow for more, but as a community grows, we see that the participation doesn't always grow. So, and that influences the risk reduction investment requirements. We really like to see that smaller size where people are really working together. They have to make a plan. So based on that risk assessment from, input with their stakeholders and those residents, they develop an action plan that is really goal oriented, SMART goals. What can we achieve this year that's actionable? We're rolling out some more guidance this year, trying to make people actually look at numbers, some of those metrics. And then they have to host that educational outreach event, and they have to do the work. So each site is required to invest the equivalent of 1 hour per home within their boundaries. So if they have 100 homes, they need 100 hours total. Or the monetary equivalent, it's based on the national volunteer rate that varies each year. So I really like to focus on the hours rather than the number or the dollar total. And then they have to tell us about it. So FireWise USA is an online digital program. We have a portal that you can access from firewise.org, and that's where all the work is done. So as soon as a site starts building their profile, we have visibility, their partners have visibility, and the whole thing is done online and submitted at the end with just automatic notifications to hit their state liaison for approval and then to hit me. So that's a quick overview of Firewise USA. Again, it's a program for residents that you can assist with, whether it's being that subject matter expert to help them with the risk assessment or helping them organize and host meetings. Sometimes they need assistance online. We have had some conservation districts try to be a Firewise site, and it can work if you're small, but it can be really confusing. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. If you have questions, you can reach out to us with our contact information there. And again, thank you. And I will turn it over to Anne and the next speaker.
Thanks, Megan. Of course, when we're talking about building capacity, planning, and recovery, money always comes into play. So our next speaker will be talking about funding opportunities for conservation districts as they're building capacity and recovery from disaster-related events. So I'll turn it over to David Hosek from FEMA Region 2. David.
Sorry about that. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can anybody see my screen? Can my screen be seen? Yes, that was a yes. Okay, thank you. My name is David Hosek. I'm a hazard mitigation planner for FEMA Region 2 in New York. And I'm going to go over briefly the hazard mitigation planning and give you a brief overview of that, talk about what hazard mitigation is and how it, I think we can tie this into a lot of the discussion that's gone on from here. Now, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Looks good.
All right. Let's see. What is hazard mitigation? Basically, it's any sustainable action that reduces or eliminates long-term risk to people and property from future disasters. Mitigation planning, the goal of mitigation planning is to break the cycle of disaster damage, reconstruction, and repeated damage. So why do we do hazard mitigation planning? Basically, the purpose is really for state, local, and Indian tribal governments to identify the natural hazards that impact them, to identify the actions. And you can see that on the screen. It comes out of the Code of Federal Regulations. The real purpose is to build more resilient communities and reduce the loss of life and property, increase awareness of hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities, and identifies actions for risk reduction, and it focuses local resources on the greatest risks and communicates priorities to state and federal officials. There is a planning process to develop a local hazard mitigation plan, which is generally done by counties and with their municipalities as participating in jurisdictional annexes. The first item to do is to organize the planning team. And ideally, you would want representation from the following sectors. Hazard mitigation planning generally is done through emergency management offices, but we want to break out of our silos and gain more expertise. So you look at your economic development people, your land use and development folks, and I like to say it's the land use stupid, because a lot of people are put in harm's way because of bad land use decisions. Housing sector, health and social services, it's really to start getting more and more non-conventional people involved in hazard mitigation planning, your infrastructure people, and your natural and cultural resources people. So these can be government officials, nonprofits, academia. I really stress tapping into the expertise from the universities, across our region in Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. But in our case, New York and New Jersey, we have a wealth of academic institutions with a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas that are associated with hazard mitigation. Property owners, obviously, business and industry, and others. And sometimes you don't get all of these people involved, and really you really need to reach out. So the next step would be basically identifying hazards and vulnerabilities to people, property, and community assets, so basically assessing your risks. Then you want to develop mitigation strategies. You want to prioritize your actions and tailor strategies to the unique characteristics and capability of the community. Not every community is the same. There is really no one size fits all. And then you adopt and you implement the plan. And that's the basic steps in the planning process. But what's really becoming important these days is, and we're starting to emphasize this, and have been for a while now, is a whole community approach, and you want an equitable approach. So the whole community process is essential in our estimation of developing an effective plan, and this includes to reaching out to traditionally overlooked communities in both urban and rural areas. This is becoming a big emphasis at FEMA, and also I think in the federal government in general, is to reach out to these traditionally overlooked communities to get their involvement. So we have a document that FEMA put out back in 2013 called Mitigation Ideas. And this gives the communities an idea of what can be done to mitigate against various different natural hazards. And because we're talking about wildfires, I've pulled out the basic strategies this document deals with wildfires. And basically, you want to map, through local planning and regulations, map and assess the vulnerability to land fire, incorporate wildfire mitigation into your comprehensive plan. This is, and reducing risk through land use planning. One of the problems we've seen over our reviews of hazard mitigation plans, that there's really no tie-in to land use planning with hazard mitigation planning, and we're emphasizing that a lot more now, because again, it's the land use. Where you build affects can affect your vulnerability to natural hazards. And then another strategy is to develop a wildland urban interface code, a WUI code. Some of our hazard mitigation plans talk about the WUI, but they really don't really map it or come up with any strategies as to what to do within the wildland urban interface. And also and this is obvious to everybody that's been on this conference, to encourage fire resistant construction techniques. And then on structure or infrastructure projects, retrofit at-risk structures with ignition resistant materials. Again, common sense stuff. And creating a defensible space around structures and maintenance to reduce risk. And we've been talking about that up to this point. And through natural systems protection, we implement a fuels management program, and then an education and awareness programs like FireWise to basically to increase the wildfire risk awareness and educate property owners. I've seen in some plans where the FireWise program is talked about, but they really don't emphasize or articulate as to what it means to be a fire-wise community. Just saying that doesn't tell me much, but what are you going to do about it? Are you going to be updating your land use regulations? And what kind of education programs are you talking about? So on and so forth. So there's this buzzword fire-wise, but I'm not necessarily seeing that being articulated into hazard mitigation plans. Just a casual observation. How do you get involved in hazard mitigation planning? Well, each state has a hazard mitigation officer, we call them SHMOs, and state hazard mitigation officer. You also look out to your local emergency management office. That's a good place to start. And also local or county planning commissions, metropolitan planning organizations, councils of government, et cetera, and also planning advocacy groups. Now, most of these hazard mitigation plans that we've been reviewing are basically directed by the county Office of Emergency Management. Although we're seeing more and more plans being revised using being co-led by OEMs and county planning offices, which makes a lot of sense. So that's something that we would like to see more of. And I'm not sure how it is in other states, but in New Jersey, we've been seeing that and coming up with some pretty good hazard mitigation plans. And in New York, we're seeing that a little bit. I'm not talking about Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands because I really haven't looked at any of their plans, and it's really not at this point for this particular conference. So we don't really need to go into that. Now, there are potential mitigation funding opportunities through FEMA, through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and also there's a post-fire grant program through hazard mitigation. Then there's the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the BRIC. It's fairly new. It's really a rebranding of the old pre-disaster mitigation program, but we've received some interesting news within the last day from the president that he's increasing funding for that program by $1 billion. It goes for, you can use it for both projects and for planning. And I think planning is important. And so it's certainly something to look into. HUD has a number of programs through community development block grants, and then one that's specifically for disaster recovery, and also the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, we have a little footnote here where the FEMA funding, for the most part, requires to have a hazard mitigation plan that's been approved by your regional planning, your regional FEMA office, and before you could qualify for that funding. And so we have a number of resources that you can look into online that would help you get started in getting involved with hazard mitigation planning. And you can see them there, and for planning itself, and then grants that require hazard mitigation plans, and then also a link to all the state hazard mitigation officers in country. Also, some very good stuff that's been put out by the American Planning Association on hazard mitigation planning and integrating that into land use planning, and then also planning for wildfires and planning for the wildland urban interface. Those are worth looking into. I would, I think that if you're not a member of the American Planning Association, there is a fee for you, but but you can set up a non-member membership there to be able to acquire these documents, download it for your use. So we're getting to where we're planning for wildfires, planning for hazards in general, and land use are starting to get better integrated than they have been in the past. And that's about all I have for now. I'll be waiting for the Q&A when we're finished. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I did see that there is some questions coming into the chat. So go ahead and throw your questions in the chat, and we will come back to those in the Q&A after our third speaker. So rounding out our panel is the conservation districts, providing expertise to landowners in many ways in all the cohesive strategy goal areas. So coming to us from Connecticut Association of Conservation Districts, I will hand it off to Denise.
Thank you. Let's get that. Hopefully everybody can see that.
We can, thanks.
Great. So my name is Denise Savageau, and I wanted to just go into my background a little bit so that you know where I'm coming from during this presentation. I started my career some 30 years ago working for the Hartford County Soil and Water Conservation District. And then I took a job with a local municipality where I worked for the last 20 years. But a lot of the skills I brought to my work with the municipality, I learned working with the Hartford County Soil and Water Conservation District. And some of the work then I did there when I worked with a local municipality, working on the hazard mitigation plan, working in the emergency operations center, are because of skills I learned with the district. So I'm hoping to share some of that and say this is where districts can go. A lot of the work that districts are doing, as we've learned, really fits into this. So let's start about that. The districts, provide locally led soil and water conservation programs on working in natural lands across the nation. And in the Northeast, that's pretty much working with farmers, private landowners, private forest owners, but urban and rural communities. We work in that urban and rural interface a lot. And we work with local governments, particularly when we're working on programs like the EPA 319 non-point source pollution program. We do a lot of work with local governments on those types of programs. And of course, all of this is working in collaboration. We work locally, we get things implemented at the local level and on private landowners, but we work at the regional, state, and with federal partners all the time. So we're a natural fit for looking at working, across landscapes. Again, we work on this landscape scale, and the one thing that the work of the Conservation District do is we always focus on healthy ecosystems, and we understand that healthy ecosystems equal resilient communities, whether we're working on watershed management, excuse me, or soil health, invasive species management. We know that a healthy watershed, a healthy forest ecosystem is going to be what we need to do. And a lot of times, again, we know that these landscape scale projects, we may be working on the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we may be working on a smaller watershed, but we know that once we have that watershed plan in place, then we're implementing at the local level. And I think that's really the strength of the Conservation District, is we really are working with the landowners, the private property owners. We know how to get that done. And so we're working at multiple levels of government. And again, like I said, I think that's one of the strengths. So the one thing I wanted to touch base on is that conservation districts already work in natural hazard mitigation. Even if they were not part of the, haven't worked on a national mitigation, a natural hazard mitigation plan, haven't been an official part of that. We do this all the time. We work on flood mitigation. We work on the PL 566 Watershed Operations Program. We work on emergency watershed protection programs when there's an emergency. We work closely with our NRCS partners on both of those programs, the PL 566 and the emergency watershed. We do so much work on urban stormwater management. And again, that's all about looking at, like, sometimes, you know, rather than the really big flood hazards that we might be looking at with flood mitigation, but the urban stormwater management is all about those smaller urbanized watersheds and what we're doing, not just for water quality, but about water quantity. Where do we have that localized stream flooding, those underpasses that flood? So we do so much work in both of those areas. We obviously do a lot of work on drought resilience. And I think we're doing more and more on that as we're talking about climate change, and we're seeing what's happening, you know, on the landscape. And we're really, because of the work we do in flood mitigation, urban, we're really looking at the water and the water regime, and we understand what's going on. So again, our work on healthy forests and healthy soils where we get better infiltration, it's all about looking at that drought resilience, whether we're working on an agricultural land or whether we're looking at forest land to protect a public drinking water supply. Conservation districts are already working in all of these areas. And again, we work on things like stream bank stabilization. So it may not be a flood, but it may be, we know that we've got some areas where if we have some challenges with high volume water, it may not be that we're going to get flooding in a situation, but we may have some stream bank collapses, or we may have, you know, some small bridge collapses, and some work that needs to be done to make sure that these are stable and that these are repaired correctly, or that they were installed correctly in the first place, so that we don't have the challenges. Maybe we're preventing some erosion from happening downstream and blocking the roadway that's essential. So we work on natural hazard mitigation all the time. And I wanted to point that out because it's a natural then for us to start talking within this context about fire protection. And I think that the work that Minnesota was talking about, you know, explained that, particularly, you know, all the work they were talking about in watersheds, and a lot of times focusing on that water quality, but also the water quantity, that idea of infiltration and protecting us from drought, and what we need to do here. The photo here is of a stream gauge that one of the conservation districts in Connecticut had installed. And what they're doing is monitoring the stream flow here. And, you know, a lot of times when we think about stream gauges, and we work very closely with USDA to look at those stream gauges and make sure that they're put in. And that's one of the things we could do. So, for example, in the community I worked for, I applied for a hazard mitigation grant from FEMA to install and work with the USGS to install a gauge in my community. And we looked at it primarily from a flood mitigation perspective because it was a stream that we had flooding on. But interestingly enough, I use that gauge just as often to monitor for drought. And so I think that's one of the things that the strengths of the conservation district is we know these tools and we know how to use them. We know that the information is online real time, and how important that is to have that real-time data when we're dealing in emergency situations, but also being able to read those gauges real-time just from a monitoring perspective. So, for example, when we're looking at fire ponds or streams that we know we're using as a water source for fire protection, are we looking at those stream gauges? So just some work the conservation districts are already doing, and we can expand on this. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the skills that I brought with me to my Emergency Operations Center. And I love the idea of the de-silo. And I actually do a presentation from a stormwater management and a coastal stormwater perspective on getting us out of our silos, where we need first responders who I respect so greatly with their skill set, and then environmental planners, like a lot of times we find at the conservation districts, and how do we make sure that the two are working together? We need, when we're doing land use planning, we need first responders at the table. When we're doing, when we're in the Emergency Operations Center, we can use environmental planners, conservation district folks in those emergency operations centers with the skills they have. So one of the things I brought to the table was skills in GIS and interpreting these stream and tidal gauges. And I became an integral part of our emergency operations center. And the one thing it did was free up our first responders from having to deal with that. They knew they had someone who really understood stream gauges, who understood flooding, who understood how to work with the weather gauges. And even though we get that the National Weather Service was giving us information statewide out of our emergency operations center, I was able to look at the local stream gauges and really bring that localized information to my town when we were working on this. So just quickly, I'll go through this slide. We're looking at, obviously Superstorm Sandy was coming in, and I just wanted to show this because this is a landscape scale storm, and this is what we deal with in the Northeast oftentimes. And, we think about that, it's all about flooding and it's all about some other issues. But one of the things that people don't always remember is that during hurricanes, we can have major fires. And there was quite a few fires that came about as a part of Sandy. The biggest one probably was Breezy Point in New York. But we had one in Greenwich where I was working in the Emergency Operations Center. And one of the things that I was able to do when my fire chief, who I respect greatly, came up to me very calmly and said, "Denise, I need your help." And what he had was a major fire going on. This would be the ocean here coming into this situation on this map. And the areas in orange there on the map, that's the house lots where the houses were on fire. And he had his fire engines in there with the sea coming in because the tide was coming in with the storm. And as the hurricane was ramping up with 90 miles an hour wind, we now had these people who were in this area who, where we had our fire department trucks that were going to be flooded. So using my GIS skills and also my knowledge of stream gauges and where we were going to expect this, and I should say tidal gauges, in this scenario, where I knew the flooding was going to occur, and looking at the elevation maps, I was able to tell him where to stage his fire equipment during this storm event. So I'm just letting you know that these is the type of skills that we can bring to an emergency operations center. Interestingly enough, this was just the tip of the iceberg, because that was during the emergency operations center, but then we learned a lot of lessons from this particular scenario. So I wanted to talk about this in terms of fire and how we can use these skills across the landscape. And so I looked at the cohesive wildlife management strategy, and restoring resilient landscapes is the first, creating fire adapted communities, and then safe and effective wildfire response. And I looked at some of the programs that I know are going on in the Northeast as the Northeast region chair, and kind of put those into play. So restoring resilient landscapes, and again, we heard about this from Minnesota with the great work, and we know that all of the districts work in watershed management, and that is the scale that I think is a great scale for working on what we're doing and restoring our forests. I wanted to point this one out because this is, one of the ones that is unique, I think, to the Northeast. And this is about Phragmites. And I know that there was a major wildfire problem with Phragmites in the Great Lakes area. We have real challenges with monocultures of Phragmites along the whole Atlantic seaboard. This happened to be in Hartford County, and this marsh that you're seeing in the left-hand corner was dominated by Phragmites. And what you can't see off of this picture is this is the intersection of I-84 and 384, and right off of this forested area are some of the most vulnerable communities in Manchester and East Hartford, which are kind of our working class neighborhoods in this part of Connecticut. And so by restoring this, we reduced the fire hazard, even though this was mostly they were looking at restoring the ecosystem services and not necessarily fire. But we now have this wetlands that was dominated by Phragmites, restoring to native species, and is no longer the fire hazard it once was. So when we're looking at, there's a whole lot of examples of invasive species and the damage they do in our forests and whatever. But I wanted to show this particular example of Phragmites as well, because we do have some grasslands that we deal with. So it's not just the wildfire interface in terms of forests, it also is grasslands. creating fire adapted communities. In New York, they have a post-flood stream repair program that calls for the districts that already have a technical network to assist municipalities following an emergency. So there's a list on the website there that said, call these municipalities after a flood happens, and they will tell you how to do emergency repair of these streams in a very timely manner. They do training ahead of time so that people know who to call. And I'm liking this to the idea of, well, why wouldn't we have, if we have fire damage post, fire, would you call in the conservation district to do landscape planning? How do we reforest? How do we do what needs to be done immediately within that forest area? And how do we rebuild that forest? So here's an example of New York already doing it in a flood situation, but certainly this type of program, if the districts can do it for the flooding, they can also do it for forestry repair. And my guess is that we have districts that are working, who do more forestry work, who are already doing this. But I think that we could do this across the board with conservation districts. Having safe and effective wildfire responses. Well, who knew? The Vermont Association of Conservation is the sponsor of the Vermont Rural Fire Protection Program since 2013. It was originally an RC&D project, and when the RC&D disbanded, they were looking for a new home, and Vermont Association of Conservation District picked this up. And the gentleman who runs this program basically said if the Association of Conservation District hadn't picked up this rural fire protection program, it wouldn't be there. They basically saved the program. This is pretty much a dry hydrant program, and it's an easy fit for conservation districts. So I think a lot of districts already work on dry hydrants. I want to bring this just back to the stream gauge monitoring that I was talking about. One of the things that I looked at in my community when I was monitoring those stream gauges, again, not just for flooding, but for drought, then I started looking at, okay, I started making a correlation between when my dry fire ponds and my dry hydrants were having problems. I could tell that by the stream gauges, and I would tell my fire folks, go out and do inspections. And in more rural communities where there may not be as much staff, it may be the conservation districts or conservation volunteers who could get out and make sure that we have monitoring, because there's nothing worse than getting to a fire and expecting there to be a dry hydrant and a fire pond and realizing that there's no water in that fire pond. So that's one of the things that I think would be a great program that the conservation districts could do. We already have models for it. I know conservation districts work on dry hydrants and fire ponds on farms, but certainly can do it across rural communities as well. And just one last example, and in Pennsylvania, they have the dirt, gravel, and low volume road program. And I think we know how important roads are for access as well as for evacuation, and that was kind of mentioned. And, I was interested when Minnesota was talking about that they have their biggest fire hazard in March, April, and May, and thinking about that, all of those roads, the rural roads that need repair following, a nasty winter where we have those freeze and thaw events. And I know particularly in New England, that is a season where, okay, we need to look at like what's going on with these dirt roads. And so having a program like this is a program that was developed by the university, but is now administered by the Soil and Water Conservation Districts at the county level, looking at these roads. And it's certainly looking at one of the things you could do from a fire-wise protection is working with the foresters, working with the fire folks and saying, where do we need these roads repaired from a fire protection perspective? What's the access? And certainly, although in Pennsylvania, it's their forest department, their forestry department that takes care of the lands on state properties. I'm sure there's plenty of private properties that need some small road repair as well. And the districts have the expertise. If you're not familiar with this dirt, gravel, and low volume road maintenance program, it is amazing. They did a workshop for us at one of our regional meetings for NACD, and it really should be a model for the program on how to maintain dirt, gravel, and low volume roads. So that's just one more example of work that districts are districts are already doing and how it fits in. So I guess the bottom line is that there's so much work the conservation districts can do, you know, whether it be GIS mapping, whether it be putting in stream gauges, whether it be engaging the communities that we work on 319 projects all the time. You know, a lot of time we are running, you know, projects on water quality, and it engages all of the community. And I think starting to work with the emergency first responders is a natural. I do want to say that, you know, when we think about fire departments, we think about fire response. But most of us know that our fire departments you know, are not just, they don't just do fire response. They're really engaged in flood and emergency response throughout. So whenever there's an emergency, it's the fire department is on the front line, as well as our law enforcement. So the idea of conservation districts working with the emergency services on all of the natural disasters that we find, I think will be a benefit. So it's not just going to them and saying, hey, can we help you with wildfire? It's actually saying, hey, can we help you with you know, flood response? Can we help you with some other types of response? Just quickly, when I was talking about the GIS mapping, one of the things I did for my fire departments is I started mapping all of the catch basins. And why is that important? Well, in a coastal surge, the seawater starts coming up. A lot of times it doesn't come over the seawalls first, it starts coming up through the storm drain. So I was able to map all the storm drains and be able to let our first responders know this is the areas that are going to flood first because the water is coming up the storm drains. So those are just some of the expertise that, you know, conservation districts, particularly those working in urban areas, can bring to a local emergency response. And I think tying that in, then it's a natural transition to also working on this wildfire aspect as well. So I think I'll wrap it up there and see, hand it over to the moderators for questions.
Thank you, Denise. And also thank you, Megan and David. It's great to hear about the interplay across all these different areas and how we can come together to make a difference. And so thank you. And I will hand it back to Anne.
Very good. Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate your moderation of this panel, and also to Leanne for the earlier one. I really enjoyed everything that I heard in this session. I think because of the time, we only have about 4 minutes left, but I do want to read the question that was put into chat for David. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at it. It says, how are costs of foundational data incorporated into a hazard mitigation project?
Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise, but I would imagine that you would include that as a total, part of the cost of the project when you're applying for the grant. Some of that information could be also available through your regional FEMA office, the risk analysis branch, perhaps in the mitigation division. Some of it could be available, from your state hazard mitigation office. Could also be available from a local university. So there are ways of getting that data.
Right, and I completely understand what you're saying, David. I honestly believe that the data question is more siloed than the fire response. I'm just saying. So when you talked about the hazard mitigation plans and that kind of the lack of a bridge between the FireWise program and such, or that you don't see the regulation part of the land use change so much in the, that may be part of FireWise, or like Megan talked about NFPA. It isn't front and foremost. Most landowners don't want any more regulation. I understand that. But to change what you talked about, where that's not showing up in the hazard mitigation plans. One thing I do want to ask is, like, how do you see us making that change so that that does happen and that they do show in those hazard mitigation plans, and knowing that a lot of those are already done and they may be cyclical as far as every 5 years? How would a conservation district now actually go into their office and say, hey, we want to be in the plan, we know we need to be in here to be able to participate in a project post-event, but they've already done their plan and the conservation district may not be in there? So that's my second part of my question. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, you need to reach out to, let's say, your local, your county planning office, your county OEM, and say, hey, we have something we can bring to the table, and we would like to be part of the planning process. And quite honestly, the education that I've gotten today will probably have me telling counties when their plans are up for readoption to reach out to the conservation districts, because they bring a lot of valuable expertise to the table. And it's a way of breaking down the silos. We have that problem. Well, we have the problem internally in FEMA also, as any government agency does. And so we're slowly breaking down those silos within our own particular organization, but also we're saying to these counties and municipalities, reach out to the universities, for instance, reach out to the conservation. We can say now, reach out to the conservation districts. OEMs need to be talking to land use planners, so that I think the problem is that hazard mitigation is almost seen as just an emergency response type of function, but it isn't. And it's a planning responsibility. It's a response. It's a preparedness responsibility. It's a response responsibility. So it covers a lot of areas, and you need to open up to a wider array of participants, plus the people who are affected by hazard mitigation plans, mostly, particularly for flooding. We're the poorest neighborhoods. They're in floodplains, and so why are they there? It's probably the result of it's working class housing from the Industrial Revolution era on forward. So that's where they end up, and so there needs to be a way to reach out to those folks so that we can find out what their true concerns are. And
if I can interrupt, you're exactly right. Vulnerable populations or communities that have challenges, beyond where the events occur, I really do believe that there's a focus that when you're doing your local planning, you have to bring in like your state housing authority. They know where those areas are. They have their data, and sharing of that data, I think, is really critical. They're the non-traditional partners that need to come to the table early and to build those relationships, I think, to help make that plan be more effective when you need to implement it.
Right. The other player that we are starting to insist be part of the planning process is the building and development community. And quite honestly, HGTV may be one of the worst things when it comes to hazard mitigation. Because you got your beachfront house, and which is going to flood in the next hurricane, or it will be underwater anyway in 20 years.
And David, I agree with you 100%. I watch those shows, and I've been doing fire prevention my whole life, and all I can think of was like, are y'all not thinking about how to get out of there? But that's a big deal, and I'm afraid we're out of time today, because I do have another question in the chat for you, David. It was from Denise. And so I can connect you guys up afterwards. It talked about where the FEMA funding comes through this, does it come through the state emergency management office? But I'll connect you up later. I'm really sorry to have to cut this off. Megan?
I'm sorry, can I provide a point of clarification regarding Firewise USA and Firewise itself?
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that Firewise and Firewise USA are owned and registered terms from NFPA, and they're very specific to describing the recognition program. And over the last several years, we've been really working to get this out there. Like, it's not a descriptor for all things wildfire risk reduction oriented. And so we want to make that really clear that for those who participate in the Firewise program, that there is criteria for joining the program. They do have to do mitigation work, and those efforts are reported, and we do have metrics on them in our portal. And we share those metrics back with our federal funding partners, and our state partners have the ability to pull reports on that as well. So I just wanted to make that clear real quick. So thank you very much.
I'm glad that you did, Megan. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed your presentation. There are a lot of things to learn, and there'll be links in the desk guide to a lot of the tools, the tips that people have talked about, the information. I've got some great information from David and FEMA that'll be in the desk guide. And Denise, I definitely want to say thank you for going through your presentation by goal area there at the end. And that really hits home. I've known all along that conservation districts do a lot of things that are all well within the cohesive strategy goal areas. Again, I just hope that people don't get hung up on the fact that it's a cohesive fire strategy. Really look to what the tenets of this, strategy does on the ground when it's implemented. And that's something that we need right away. We need to have the local level, working together and breaking down some of the silos. They have a great relationship with NRCS, and I appreciate the comment in the chat from Terrell. Thanks so much for joining us today. I look forward to talking with you more again tomorrow on day 2. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and say thank you to everybody that was on today, attendees. Please come back tomorrow for our second half day.